the latest news poll has just dropped in The Australian, and for the first time in news poll history, core support for Pauline Nation's One Nation has surged ahead of Labor as Anthony Albanese's popularity hits record lows. Now, One Nation's primary vote, as you can see, has soared to 31%. That's 4% up. Have a look at that. Labor, 30%, and just 18% for the coalition, down 2. Now, Labor's primary vote has hit its lowest point since Julia Gillard's government polled between 26 and 30% through 2011 to 13, and we all know how that ended for the Gillard government. Now, the latest results are, of course, off the back of Labor's disastrous budget. So Anthony Albanese's net approval rating has sunk to its lowest level since the 2022 election, at -24, with 36% of Australians satisfied with his performance. 60%, more than half, are dissatisfied, and 4% are uncommitted. The last time 60% or more of voters were dissatisfied with the performance of a Prime Minister was Tony Abbott in 2015. Angus Taylor's personal ratings have improved to -10. 35% are satisfied with his performance, 45% are dissatisfied, and just 20% are uncommitted. In the head-to-head Better Prime Minister battle, Mr Taylor narrowed Mr Albanese's lead to 44% to 38%. But Labor would still lead under a two-party preferred model, slightly ahead of either One Nation or the coalition. Now, look, for all of Labor and the coalition's politicking against One Nation, it has clearly failed. Tonight's news poll reflects what we saw in the Sky News Pulse poll that dropped in the past week, and of course Redbridge's polling before that. And as we sit here tonight, One Nation is still the most popular political party in this country, and the sooner the major parties wake up and realise why, the better. Now, this is a major story, and I will dissect the numbers shortly with my panel. So with Labor's polling numbers diving by the day and that news poll ringing in their ears, you know you're in trouble when you can't even sell your own budget. Employment Minister Amanda Rishworth was on Sky News this morning with Andrew Clennell, and she was beaming with positivity to start.
I'm very proud of this budget. This budget is a reforming budget. It's about rebalancing the tax system.
A budget to be proud of. Now, that's the spirit, and the Labor talking points kept going.
This is about rebalancing the system. So we are giving more tax cuts to workers as a result of this broad tax package.
And of course, not to sway away from the talking points.
We are looking at capital gains and changing that to rebalance it and make it fairer.
And that is when the wheels really started falling off.
You are increasing your tax take from that tax.
Well, what we are doing is changing the way that capital gains is calculated and looking at what is an appropriate tax rate for that. Of course, we are rebalancing
which brings in more revenue.
But to suggest,
which is an upping of the tax, Amanda Rishworth.
To suggest that the change is just a tax hike, it is a rebalancing of the tax system.
Whoops. Yeah, better bring it back to that Labor talking point immediately. What was it? Rebalancing. We are rebalancing, everybody, rebalancing the system. Everything is just fine. Gee, they're in trouble. They're really in trouble, aren't they? Okay, almost a month after this budget was handed down, after the tax changes were pushed through the lower house on Thursday, these ministers are really struggling on the daily to sell this thing. And here was the Housing Minister, Claire O'Neill, giving it a crack this week.
What we want to see is sustainable growth, Nat. So
you want them to go up?
Well, what we want to see is sustainable growth. We certainly need to see affordability improve. But the government's changes, Nat, are not what's driving house prices in our country principally.
Yeah, but just to be clear, do you want house prices to go up or down, Claire, as the Housing Minister?
Pardon?
Do you want house prices to go up or down?
I want to see sustainable growth in house prices.
So that's up?
Well, I don't think we want to see 400% increases in house prices over the last 20 years because that's been key.
Up or down?
That's been
I'm
key
confused.
to. No, I'm trying to answer your question.
Disaster. She would have been better off going with the Rishworth line of rebalancing. OK, nobody is across it, not even the Prime Minister. He held a joint press conference with New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon yesterday when a journalist asked the New Zealand leader about changes to capital gains tax, something New Zealand doesn't have. And have a listen to Albo desperately swooping in.
What do you think when you hear our neighbours are encouraging Australians to move overseas, effectively criticising the changes to the CGT?
Well, I might jump in first here.
No, I think I know what you're going to say.
What next? The Wars signing another Jackson Ford.
Stop right there, Christopher Luxon. Stop. Say no more, please. Don't answer. Don't answer. I've got this. And what's this about signing another Jackson Ford? Was that on Labor's talking notes as well? Because, look, this whole intervention failed. The New Zealand Prime Minister actually went on to answer the question and gave this assessment of capital gains tax.
And we just think a CGT being introduced to New Zealand now would be a wrecking ball through our economy.
I mean, can you imagine what was going through Albo's head when he said that? Now, if the Prime Minister can't even handle any criticism of his own policies, how does he expect his own ministers to mop up the mess? You see, Anthony Albanese has become wealthy through negative gearing via his own property portfolio. He profited about $200,000 before scrapping capital gains tax through selling 3 investment properties worth around $5 million, 2 in Sydney and 1 in Canberra, prior to the changes, prior to claiming he had changed his position, and prior to blowing up the housing market through said changes. Never fear if you brought a home, which is now worth much less than you had anticipated. Albo's word is his bond.
Quick favour, if you love Australia and want to stay on top of what is actually happening in our country's politics, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell right now. It helps us keep this channel running. Over 90% of viewers have not subscribed yet, and it would mean the world to us if you did. Thank you. Now, back to the show.
So he's not going to say sorry to you for changing his mind, for breaking an election promise, because, well, he claims he's had the ticker to make the changes.
People haven't had the ticker to take it on.
Well, you didn't have the
ticker to take it on.
You didn't have the ticker to take it to an election. I mean, if you believe so much, Prime Minister, that we need this, if you had always had the desire to end negative gearing, to get rid of capital gains tax discount, to tax trusts, that this 1999 system of John Howard and Peter Costello was so faulty, why not take it to the last election and make the case?
Because it wasn't our position then. We have changed our position, Andrew.
Well, let me ask you, do you owe the Australian people an apology for violating their trust by going to this election, never mentioning these policies, in fact denying them to me and other journalists? Do you owe an apology over that?
It wasn't our policy. I'm not interested in word games, Andrew, and I don't think Australian people are either. They will make a judgment. Part of the judgment will be, of course, about when governments change positions, but on the merits of what we are doing, and it strikes me that if anyone out there thinks that the housing market is working, then they're bonkers.
Honestly, the way that he speaks, good to know that he's had the ticker to make these changes to get ahead while he could before the budget, but not for you at home. Now, since the budget was handed down and CGT and negative gearing changes were announced, the property market has indeed gone bonkers. Sydney and Melbourne are experiencing price falls of more than 2% over the past quarter. Sydney's final auction clearance rate in May fell to 49%. That's the lowest level since April 2020. Real estate agents say they're hitting the phones, with some facing redundancies or career pivots as listings pile up and homes stay on the market for longer. Independent price tracker Spacus Oz said in an update on Thursday, "We've spoken to agents across Sydney and Melbourne, and many say the market fell off a cliff after budget night." But hang on a minute. Wasn't the budget all about this?
These legitimate intergenerational concerns.
Intergenerational equity. The issue of intergenerational equity.
When you think about the intergenerational unfairness, sense of intergenerational unfairness, I think the intergenerational pressures are really serious.
Now, one of the most talked about topics of my age group is how we are going to enter the housing market. Because prices won't go down under negative gearing changes, they will just increase at a slower rate. And the problem is the market is already unaffordable. Young Aussies' chances of future prosperity are being smashed to smithereens by the very government that claims to be on the side of young people. And instead, it is my generation who are being treated like toddlers by Labor. Have a listen to Senator Ellie Whittaker explaining Labor's housing policies and tax changes using another one of her props.
When the Liberals were in government, they deliberately vacated the housing space and barely built any homes. They didn't even have a housing minister. They had a deliberate strategy to keep wages low, so saving for your own home was basically impossible. And they had no plan to help young Australians buy their own. Labor is changing all of that. Our 5% home deposit scheme has helped 250,000 Australians buy their own home. Our Housing Australia Future Fund is building homes right across the country. And we're reserving 100,000 of them only for first home buyers. And we're making the tax system fairer.
Yeah, our hard-earned taxpayer money at work right there. Now, this is the same senator, you might remember, who tried to explain the budget to us using a toy zebra and a giraffe. Thanks, Ellie. You can't tax your way out of supply, you know that, when already Labor has not achieved not one of its housing goals under its national accord to build 1.2 million by the end of the decade. Does that tip your scales for you? Look, it's all one big joke under this Labor Party. Now, the architect of Australia's 50% CGT discount has warned Jim Chalmers that tax changes will hurt young home savers and push first home buyers into negative equity. John Ralph has told the Daily Telegraph the biggest winner from the changes will be the government, noting that Treasury forecasts an extra $77 billion will be raised over a decade. He said that $77 billion is going to be paid by taxpayers, and the people they are going to hurt are the ones who are saving deposits. But look, don't worry, of course. Albo will tell us that he's got the ticker to make the changes. He's got the ticker to make young Aussies pay for his outrageous record spending, all in the name of intergenerational equity. He's got the ticker to break his bond, but most of all, he's got the ticker to sell off his own properties before making it worse for everyone else to do the same. Now, off the back of tonight's major news poll result, Labor knows its budget stinks. It is failing to sell it, as I said, but it has no issue throwing shade at One Nation. Now, I'll say this, One Nation MP Barnaby Joyce did bugger up on Thursday night on the Bolt Report when he did not know the party's position on housing and said permanent residents would be forced to sell their homes unless they were citizens.
Does it apply to permanent residents as well?
Well, it does. That's my belief in the policy. Right. It does, and we want to make sure that you become a permanent resident. Become a permanent resident and become an Australian citizen. Excuse me.
Now, he came back and clarified One Nation would not kick permanent residents out of their homes. Yes, he made a blunder. Yes, I would say it is embarrassing. But he fronted up and clarified. And as tonight's polling shows, Australians seem to appreciate One Nation's honesty. Now, I agree. I think One Nation should be held accountable for its comments, just like any other party. It is right to clarify and question what its policies are, and they should be prosecuted, as are other parties' policies. I agree. But in the overall scheme of what is happening in this country right now under Labor, does one Barnaby blunder really overshadow everything? But at least One Nation is sticking to its principles, is no nonsense and putting Australia first, and the latest news poll would agree with that. And that is more than Labor has ever done. And they're the ones in government. So, you know, it is no coincidence that One Nation is now the most popular party in Australia ahead of Labor. But a look around the country this weekend, you'd think One Nation was about to drop off the face of the planet. I mean, have a look at these headlines. Train wreck. One Nation tied in knots over housing plan. This one here, One Nation, 6 farcical explanations and no clearer understanding of its housing policy. Even The Australian went with Pauline Hanson hit. The truth's being costed as One Nation in disarray. Really? Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson even went with this line this morning.
It says something really distressing about their objectives in government. But no one should be surprised, but it seems like a very violent way to deal with people who are here paying taxes.
Violent? Violent? Really? Now, I would argue if anyone's in disarray, and this is where the coalition's focus should be, is on Anthony Albanese and Labor. And here was the Prime Minister today.
Do note that there's been some criticism of Barnaby Joyce for not knowing the details of what they wanted to do with permanent residents and whether they could have housing. But why wouldn't Barnaby Joyce think that that was no different from what the Liberal Party said with the questions they asked in Parliament this week, where they went down this rabbit hole?
So the Prime Minister doesn't want any questions asked about him and his policies, but he's happy to ask and question others. And was Barnaby's mishap really as bad as, I don't know, Anthony Albanese's promising no changes to capital gains tax and negative gearing, then suddenly had a whoopsie moment and his, position had changed? What about the $275 in energy relief? That old chestnut that disappeared into the never-never. Was that as bad as Barnaby's blunder? Or how about Labor's promise to cut the number of migrants when its own budget says net overseas migration won't drop for another 2 years? Or when Labor said it was easing the cost of living pressures? Now, as I said earlier, Labor can't even explain and sell its own policies right now, but it's all One Nation's fault, apparently.
Imagine being the Prime Minister of Australia and waking up to discover that One Nation, not the Coalition, not the Greens, but One Nation, now commands more primary vote support than your own party. 31% to 30% for the very first time in the history of Newspoll. That is not a sketch from a comedy show, that is the actual data. And if you think that is bad news for Anthony Albanese, buckle up, because it gets much, much worse. This was supposed to be the budget that eased the cost of living crisis, the one that was going to fix housing affordability for everyday Australians. Instead, Labor rolled out sweeping reforms to capital gains tax and negative gearing that sent the property market tumbling off a cliff. Sydney auction clearance rates crashed to 49%, the lowest we have seen since the country was in lockdown. Real estate agents across the nation are reporting a flood of listings, extended sale times and redundancies. One major agency summed it up perfectly. The market fell off a cliff after budget night. Here is the brutal truth. You can't tax your way out of a supply crisis, and this budget proved it in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Now, here is the uncomfortable part. Labor campaigned on a promise, hand on heart, no changes to capital gains tax, no changes to negative gearing. Both promises are now in pieces. The Prime Minister himself reportedly sold 3 investment properties before the reforms bit, pocketing a tidy profit. Hypocrisy or smart financial planning? The Australian public has already delivered its verdict. Albanese's wet approval now sits at -24, satisfaction at just 36%, while 60% of Australians are dissatisfied. We have not seen numbers this dire for a sitting Prime Minister since Tony Abbott in 2015. Let that sink in. Do not forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, here's the thing about One Nation's surge. Australians are not suddenly in love with every One Nation policy. They're running away from a government they see as dishonest, chaotic, and completely out of touch. When Barnaby Joyce fumbled his housing policy explanation and gave 6 different versions of the same answer, the media rightly called it a train wreck. But here's the question nobody in Canberra seems willing to answer. Is an honest mistake on policy detail worse than deliberately breaking election promises that affect millions of Australians? Voters have appeared to have already made up their minds. The contrast could not be sharper. One Nation is being seen as straight-talking and authentic, whatever you think of their platform. Labor, meanwhile, can't even get its own ministers to coherently explain the policies they're supposed to be defending. Amanda Rishworth fumbled, Claire O'Neill stumbled, and when a journalist tried to ask Albanese about capital gains tax during a press conference standing alongside the New Zealand Prime Minister, he literally blocked the question mid-sentence. That is not leadership, that is hiding in plain sight. So where to from here? The Coalition would do well to take notes. If they keep obsessing over One Nation's minor slip-ups instead of training their fire on Albanese himself, they risk becoming completely irrelevant to a conversation that's already moving without them. Meanwhile, the promised $275 energy relief payment has vanished from the budget entirely. Net overseas migration is not forecast to drop for at least 2 more years, despite yet another campaign pledge to slash it. The gap between what Labor says and what Labor does has become an unbridgeable canyon, and One Nation is driving a truck straight through the middle of it. Thank you for watching. We'll see you